Today we are in conversation with Roshan Mishra. He is the director of Taragaon Museum. Roshan Bhai, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
Uh, First thing first, we'd like to ask you regarding your introduction. How would you like to introduce yourself, whether as a director of the museum, whether as an artist, whether as an art curator? How would you do it?
I think it's a combination of all,
Right.
right? But as I'm affiliated to an institution, obviously most of the people, they know me as a director of Taragaon Museum and a curator of this museum. So if you ask me how you want to kind of identify me, I think as a director and a curator of Taragaon Museum will be good enough.
So on the same line, could you tell us more about the role and responsibility of an ideal curator in Nepal as well as in the global perspective?
I will start with my museum, then probably I'll talk about in the context of Nepal, and then maybe go globally after that. But if you think of a role of a curator, it is, like let's say 20, 30 years, 40 years ago, the role of a curator was completely different. There used to be a custodian of a collection, there used to be a safekeeper of the collection, and they used to, arrange a display for that collection. And that's how the curators were known those days. But, in this 21st century, I think the whole idea of being a curator has changed, right? I'll just come back to my role at the Taragaon Museum. How do I define myself as a curator at the Taragaon Museum? And there are various things. It's not only about, doing an exhibition regularly and then telling a story, right? It is a lot more than that when I look at my role, And when I look at my role, the Taragaon Museum is not just a displaying space. It has got so many other components that defines this institution as a museum, I believe that to become a museum, just a permanent display space is not good enough. You need to have other components to make it a museum. What are those other components? You may want to have a library within the museum, you may want to have an archive within the museum, you may want to have programmings, you may want to do exhibitions, external exhibitions, internal exhibitions. There's so many other components that needs to be added to make it as a museum, right? So when I look at it in that context, I think being a curator, I wear so many different hats, One as a custodian of a collection. The other one is I manage the archive, so I look at the archival material which connects directly with the museum's collection. And thirdly, I think, the activity part is so important, and that means the permanent exhibition, the temporary exhibitions, other events, that is so important. And the most important part is how do you connect your collection with the local audience and a global audience, and how do you interact with them through that collection. And that is the most important part, and it is also, you can also coin that as an educational component as well, because that is so important, right? Because if you don't share what you have got, then that collection doesn't mean anything. If that doesn't get activated, then that collection doesn't mean anything. And I think as a curator, my role is to, look at the permanent collection, be a custodian of the museum collection, the archive, the designing of program, the additional programmings we do for education and other stuff. I think those are the key ingredients for me to kind of define as a curator, right? And I think those are, whatever I've mentioned, those are the activating agencies. If you don't activate the institution, if you don't activate your collection, then just a static display doesn't mean anything. It doesn't do any justice to the local audience. It doesn't give any impact to the local audience, right? I think the idea of bringing them all together, making it a community space, talk about culture, tradition, history, and the collection. And I think that is how I see my role as a curator. I think in the context of Nepal, when we talk about curatorial work, we may just talk about one particular exhibition or one particular art fair or a Biennale or a Triennale or whatever that could be. But I think it's not only that. I think being in an institution, it is an ongoing effort. It's not something you create and you complete. I think it's an ongoing effort, and through that effort, what I basically want to do is I want to connect with the community. I want to engage with students, adults, and all sort of people, who are interested in our collection. And the other challenge is, I think, being a curator, being a museum director, I think I need to reach out the broader audience. If you go to any exhibitions in Kathmandu, right, you see the same audience repeating again and again, right? How do you bring different group of people within an institution? So if I want to do that, I think I have to go through a programming. The collection of the museum is not enough. I think we have to look at their need from their level, rather than we trying to narrate something that doesn't mean anything to them. So I think, all these layers will add, I think, for me to be a curator.
Right. So are you satisfied with what is happening in the curatorial aspect here in most of the galleries of Nepal?
I think the trend is quite interesting, right? If I look at the time frame when I was at the university, there were only few galleries, and then nobody was talking about curatorial shows. Now I think most of the galleries, and most of the independent curators, they're doing their own shows, and I think the curatorial show has become so important in Kathmandu that I think it gives a completely different vibe to the exhibition, and it also tells a completely different narrative about that particular collection or artist. So I think the trend is quite promising in that sense, right? But I think for us, I think it's a long run. I think it's a good start, but I think for us to become visible in the international arena, I think we have to work really, really hard. But overall, I must say that it is very interesting what is happening in Kathmandu when you look at the art scene.
Mm-hmm. Let's just ask a bit interesting question. Let's say there's one artist who is also curating things. Do you think that he gives justice to the artwork prepared by other artists in a right manner if it does not have the right education of the curatorial aspect?
I think, in Nepal's context, if you look at most of the curators, they came from the art field. Many of them, they are artists themselves. I feel being an artist and getting involved into curatorial work is a benefit. And I think when you look at the artwork created by other artists, I think that particular curator who could also be an artist, they may be able to interpret the whole, the concept in a completely different way. I think that aspect is positive, right? But as you have mentioned, whether that is going to be justified or not, I think that depends on really how they want to interpret other artists, the concept. Because when you try to justify somebody else's work, there might be some sort of a friction that you might not identify straight away. I think being an artist and looking at another artist's work, most of the time you become critical, right? And I'm not too sure whether if that factor comes in, I'm not too sure how the curatorial aspect is going to be taken forward. But I think it's a good thing that the artist will have that opportunity to curate such work. But from the curatorial concept, I think, if you are looking at one particular work, or if you are looking at a series of work, that could be a different way to kind of interpret the whole collection. If you're doing a group show, or if you're doing, let's say, if you're dealing with a solo show, that could be completely different. So I think it's a very case-to-case kind of scenario, and it's a very subjective thing as well, I think. But what I would say is, like, when you do such kind of curatorial, shows, I think rather than creating your own idea, or rather than pushing your own idea, you need to come up with a narration where people will be able to take that narration and let them decide how they want to take it forward. So being a curator, I would not like to guide the audience in one particular way. I want to tell a story, but from one point onwards, I want them to take that story forward, so they could understand in a completely different way. That is absolutely okay for me. But when you look at the curator, contemporary art forms, I keep on saying to all my friends, it's never 2 + 2 = 4. It could be 3 or it could be 5. And let the audience decide. And I think that approach is definitely needed. Whoever is going to do the show, whoever is going to plan that sort of curatorial exhibition, I think that approach is definitely needed.
So as we are having a conversation with different sets of artists, even to this date, most of the artists and the layman are confused, quote unquote. Curators only hang the paintings in one particular place, and that looks beautiful. Is that all the role that a curator has? Let's say it's just like a Vastu Shastra, where the painting gives much more meaning, and where the paintings are hung. Is it all the role of the curator? Like you said before, you were talking about the global perspective. What other responsibilities are there as a curator?
I think what the interpretation what you have just given is an interpretation which is usually seen by the end user. When you go to the gallery, it's all hanging beautifully, and that's what you basically talk about, right? And that is definitely defined after seeing the exhibition, because it's the end user will only see that the curatorial role is like this curator probably has come in in the last day and they have hung the exhibition. It's not like that. I think there is a process when you talk about any kind of exhibition, or if you talk about any sort of curatorial project, that is a process. If you don't follow the process, you will not be able to give an end result, right? What you are mentioning me is you are defining, you are judging the book by its cover. So the exhibition displays the cover, and that's how people will judge, right? So that is not the actual judgment. The actual judgment is its content. It's the back end of the whole process and the story behind the scene, right? What is that story behind the scene? That has got lots of other components. You need to meet the artist, you need to visit the studio, you need to have this deeper conversation with the artist, you need to make a note of every single conversation you may have been having with the artist. You're looking at the fabrication part, you're looking at the design part, you're looking at the social media part, you're looking at the publication part. you're looking at virtually everything that happens behind the scene, you know. And you know, being in a smaller country, working in a very small environment, we actually end up doing that, you know. When you look at the bigger festivals and bigger exhibitions, bigger you know, art exhibitions, what you see is there are so many people behind the scene who are supporting the curator as per their guidelines, right? And if that doesn't happen, the big shows will never be implemented. You know, if you talk about, let's say, Kochi Biennale is happening now, how is that happening? It's not one curator's job, is it? There's so many things happening at the back end. That particular curator designing a small gallery within that space is supported by so many other individuals, so many other experts, you know. And the curator's role is to constantly be in touch with all these people and get what he wants or she wants, right? And then only they will be able to implement that exhibition. But what I've realized is, you know, when you are not dealing with such a huge exhibition and being in a smaller country like in Nepal, what happens mostly is you end up doing everything. Me as a curator in the Taragaon Museum, I basically do every single thing. I'm not complaining about that, but it is also a process for learning, you know. And I think that is the best part that we have within our art industry, you know, because you're not getting any support from anywhere. You end up doing everything by yourself. So that means you will deal with fabricator, you deal with exhibition designer, you deal with, you know, writers, you deal with translators, you deal with all sort of people. But at the end of that process, what you are achieving is an experience, right? I've been to so many different museums around the world, and every time I talk with curators, they can only talk about their department only. Or to be very, very specific, they can only define their job role as per what they do in a daily basis. They don't deal with any other departments. They don't deal with any other, you know, aspect of the museum. So what is happening here is we are actually learning, and that is the best way to learn, right? So, you know, when you look at exhibitions in Nepal, I think we should really acknowledge all these individuals, artists, curators, and whoever are designing these shows. I think they are trying their best to reach to that level, and they're doing virtually everything by themselves. So if you compare the way we work here and if you compare the way you work elsewhere in the world, it's completely different, right? Even if you compare that with India or Pakistan or Bangladesh, it's completely different, right? So I think for us, I think it's a learning process. We are homegrown curators. We have never been trained by any other institutions. I don't recall anyone who have been trained as a curator and come to Nepal, you know, and that has been their curator practice. I can't think of anybody else. If you remember anyone, let me know. But that is how we have learned, right? So I think that is one of the reasons everybody else, the viewers, are judging, oh, they're just coming here and hanging the exhibition and they're saying they're curators. I think most of the people, they don't realize how much time we spent, you know, to make that exhibition happen. You know, in the West or even in our neighboring country, India, you may have like 20 people working in one project. We have 3 people working for one project. You know, how do we make that possible? And I think that is the best part within the Nepali art industry, you know, how we are making things happen, how we are going beyond, you know. And if we don't have that passion, if we don't have that dedication, we will not be able to do that. And I think it's all about that, right? I think, you know, even though we are doing a smaller show, and if that is becoming very effective, that is good enough. You know, there were days where we just, as you have said, like we literally used to go inside the gallery and we used to hang, you know, exhibits, and we are calling it, that was a curator show. But it is not happening in that way at the moment, I think. Some sort of a curatorial, you know, approach is there, you know, and over the period of time it will grow, it will evolve, and I don't think we are in a stage to complain about it. I think it's a process, you know. It's a step-by-step thing. If we're in a step 2, we can't be in step 10, right? We have to go to 3, we have to go to 4, and I think that is the process we're in. So I think when you look at the whole you know, the curatorial shows that are happening in Kathmandu, there are various type of shows you can see, you know, like you have got Kathmandu Trinale, you have got Photo Circle doing some sort of, you know, exhibitions. There are other organizations, they're constantly, regularly doing curatorial show, and you know, and that is the process, you know. Everybody is doing from their own capacity, you know, they have their own resources to make things happen, and everyone is limited, you know. So I think whatever is happening at the moment, the idea of having a curator for a show, I think that was important, and I think people have realized that, the art community, they have realized that, you know, and they are the one who could promote the artists nationally and internationally as well, and they could be the key person for the artists to connect them with different galleries around the world, nationally, internationally, you know. You know, having said that, our art community is very small, maybe nothing much can happen nationally, but yeah, everybody has got their own connection, you know, and things could start happen, and I think that the whole trend, I see it in a very positive way.
Let's switch the topic a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about the art scene here. As a director and curator at the Taragaon Museum, you have also been constantly watching the art scene in the global perspective. Where do you find the difference, or where are we heading as a Nepali artist?
I think, you know, if you compare the Nepali art scene in a global scenario, it will be unfair. You know, I don't think we would be able to do a like-to-like comparison. I think we have to look at the trend, how we are progressing and where we are heading, and that is the most important part. And I think we have to look at our own practices as well, how we are going to change the way we were working before, you know, and how we can be a part of the international art community, and that is very, very important. But if you look at the shows that I've been doing at the Taragaon Museum, I'll talk about 2 particular shows. One is the Object in Focus, and the other one is the Nepali Art Beyond the Border. And the whole idea of conceptualizing both of these shows was to kind of generate a different interest among the artists, you know. And one of my main worry was, you know, artists that we have within the Kathmandu, let's say in Kathmandu or overall in Nepal, you can say, we are very much doing the same thing again and again. You know, our practice has been regularly the same medium, the same topic most of the time, and the same kind of narration. So most of the artists, I think, are kind of very comfortable to do what they were doing and then continue the same process. And what I was trying to do through these 2 shows was to bring artists or encourage those artists to push the boundary and do something completely different that they have not done before, you know. And when you look at, you know, I think artists, they should be almost like a chef in a way, you know. The chef, you give them they have the ingredients, but they can make Chinese, they can make Italian, they can make Indian, they can make any sort of flavors from the same ingredient, right? And I think artists should be able to do the same thing as well. Why are we not being able to create different flavors? So the idea was to kind of push them to create something new that they may not have done before, right? And I wanted them to see their own artwork in a completely different perspective than how they were seeing the same artwork before. So both of these shows were very much driven from that idea, right? Object in Focus is basically it's a one artist, one object, and one big idea I was coining it as. What that idea meant is something unusual they may have done within their, within their artistic career. And I want them to bring that piece into a gallery space. And I wanted them to narrate that particular artwork for the audience. And the interesting part about this particular show was like, it's just, you go to a gallery and you only find one particular artwork within the gallery space. And what I've realized is when something like that happens, people will come and speak with the artist. They will come and speak with the curator, and they will probably spend 20-25 minutes within the gallery space. But if you look at the same situation with a group show, what was happening is like you may have like 40 art pieces in a gallery, and then within 20 minutes the audience was just going inside the gallery and coming out, and they say, oh, this is a beautiful show. What is the difference? And I really wanted people to kind of understand how they were perceiving art. And when I started doing the object in focus, and when I started talking about one particular object, people were really, really curious why one particular object was displayed in a gallery. And I used to talk to my audience, artists, curator friends, and it's a completely different way of interpreting art. If you create a focus, you will not be able to divert to anything else, right? You go inside the gallery and you only see one piece of art. So obviously the conversation will, happen around it. And that was quite interesting. The artist was learning completely something new. The curator was learning something new from the audience. And that interaction was very, very important for me. And, I think the show became really interesting for the artist community. And then I frequently get calls from my artist friends and art circle people, and they wanted to be a part of this show. Their creation is something different, and they wanted to give that artwork a completely different space. And I think the object in focus will offer that space for the artist and also for the audience as well. And it creates that space for audience and the artist to interact within that space and talk about anything and everything, right? And when you talk about the Nepali art beyond the border, it is the same concept, but it is a group show. And why did I call it beyond the border? The idea was to go out from the frame. When you talk about a border, I was talking about a frame, And what will happen if artists are not creating anything on a canvas or a paper, and if they use completely different medium to express themselves? And being an artist myself, I always feel that every idea or every concept that you may incubate within you may need a completely different medium for it to become effective. There were days like whatever we were thinking like 20 years ago, like if I was thinking something, I would have been sketching or painting that, right? Nowadays I don't do that. I will just conceptualize the whole idea and think about how I can express that concept through a medium. That could be a painting, that could be a sculpture, that could be an installation, that could be a video art, or that could be anything else, right? So being an artist, we need to find out which medium will be effective for the idea you may have, conceptualized. And I think that whole idea kind of gave a new concept, you know. And I think that's why people were engaged in the Nepali art beyond the border. You know, we had 10 artists exhibiting in that particular exhibition, and it was I think it was very successful. You know, people were completely doing something they were not doing before, you know. And I really wanted to see that trend in Kathmandu, you know. And what was happening is, like, you know, we all need to have some sort of, you know, regular income source. And I know, like, many of the artists, they create artworks, paintings, sculpture, and they sell it, you know. And that is the source of income. But what I was trying to convey to my artist friend was, you know, like, you may send like 10, 20 artworks in a year, but just keep aside one, you know, the fund for the one artwork, and then invest that on, you know, into conceptual art. You know, create something else. You may have to spend to kind of exhibit what you have conceptualized. You know, like when you look at the installation videos, they're expensive because you end up spending, you know, and it's something that may not give you any return either. But I think we have to think it in a completely different way. I think that is the way to kind of express yourself as an artist in a completely different way. Stop doing that. I think that will limit us, you know. But if you look at the international art fairs, for example, the Indian art fair, or if you think about the Frieze art fair, or if you talk about any other art fairs, you see so many conceptual art in the gallery space. There are more floor space taken than the wall space at the moment, right? So how do we turn that situation around? Because what is happening at the moment is we have got more wall space utilized than the floor space, right? So I'm not saying that it is very, very important. It has to be always like that. You know, like there's a portrait artist. Obviously, they have to hang their portraits on the wall. But if you are trying to become a contemporary artist, I think you have to try different mediums, you know. And that is what I was trying to do. I wanted to push the artists, and then I wanted them to create some contemporary artworks, you know. And I think the Nepali art beyond the border allowed artists to explore in that way. And I'm looking to do a second episode, and I hope that will continue to happen. And these are like the shows, you know. I think for Nepal, I think it's a little bit different, also interesting, and it will let the artist and audience to kind of see the artwork and art practices in the completely different way.
So right in the beginning, we were also when we were introducing you, we were talking about your role as a director of the museum. We were also talking about your role as a curator of the museum. And there's yet another role that you are performing right now as an archivist. You also belong to a legacy of Manoj Babu Mishra. And you might be thinking of some way to archive things there. What exactly is archiving for you?
I think archiving means many different things to many individuals, you know. But I think for me, coming from the art background, working with the Architectural Museum, managing the Nepal Architecture Archive, you know, and along with that, managing my own father's material, makes me an archivist, but in a completely different way, I believe. I think I've got one collection where I'm very much personally attached, which is my father's collection. And that particular collection, I think if I pick anything and then if I smell it, I can smell my father's history. You know, I have got that sort of attachment. And when I talk about the Nepal Architecture Archives collection, I have spent almost 10 years with the same collection. You know? And the collection means completely different to me. I'm attached with the collection in a completely different manner. And the way I see archives is, but if you think about the whole, the human history, I think the way I see is we are nothing without our own history, without knowing our own history, And somehow we are ignoring our recent past. What happens is like, throughout the day you end up doing so many things. But when you come home and lie down on your bed and think about what you did in that day, you'll only remember the things that impacted you, right? But there's so many things that has happened within that day, but you don't recall that, or you don't register that within your system. But I think when you look at the archive, I think it is about registering those ignored time frame as well. It's not only about those historical time frame, but you are also aiming to record those ignored time frame, which was an important part of your own journey that you did not remember, right? But when you look at the same journey after 20 years, that will mean something to the people of that time frame, right? So I think archiving, I think when you look at the archiving practices, I think we're talking about history, we're talking about memories, we're talking about material culture, and we're talking about preservation and conservation, and there's so many elements and layers attached to that practice. And when you look at the material itself, I think, like when you have something in the archive, let's say if you have a diary, for example, in the archive, and it might say that it has got sketches from Kathmandu Valley, right? But yeah, the title might tell you that it has sketches from Kathmandu Valley, but when you start, that is just one layer of that particular material, right? But if you start looking at that material in the depth, you'll see so many other layers attached to that particular sketch. It might talk about the valley itself, it might talk about heritage and culture, it might talk about urbanization, it might talk about agriculture, it might talk about the costume of the people, it could talk about so many different things. Till now we were only trained to look at the materials in one perspective, and I think nowadays, why we are talking so much about archives, because we wanted to explore the same materials and get into different layers within that particular object or the material, right? Because you cannot only tell one story and say, okay, this is what it is, but there's so many layers attached to those materials, and I think that is the most important part when you look at the archive and how you want to activate that archive and share those stories, And when you look at personal archives, like my father's collection, it has also got multiple stories. There's one particular distinct part which could talk about my father's history and his life as an artist, but the same collection could talk about so many various things as well. So my father's collection talks about so many other things: his family life, his life as a literary person, his life as a cave artist. There's so many things you can talk about, right? So I think when you look at my attachment with archive, I think I look at the whole practice in a completely different way, and I think the one key element within the whole process is recording everything that you have. It's not about, you are not the right person or as an archivist, I'm not the right person to say, okay, this is not what I want to archive and this is only what I want to archive. You know, when you look at the collection, you have to respect and recognize the makers, you know, the whole process of making that archival collection. You know, it's not, you know, the makers, they normally did not think about archiving. They just created materials and they had their own way of organizing those materials. And being an archivist, what is important is we do not intervene the original order of any materials. You know, there is always a logic how that was arranged by that maker. And I think there are so many such norms that archivists should know, you know, before handling any sort of materials. You know, at the moment what is happening is I'm the only person who is handling my father's material. Here at the Nepal Architecture Archive, we are 2 people who are managing the collection. You know, and it will slightly change. I think it also gives you an opportunity to see the collection very closely. You know, one of the reasons I worked with my father's archive during the COVID time was to understand what he had. You know, being a son, I did not even know what was there. So that process gave me a very good idea that what I had within my collection, and I started segregating it, not destroying the original order. I only segregated the materials, right? So I think that the archive is so important at the moment. You know, like I'm dealing with physical archives here in the Nepal Architecture Archive as well as with my father's collection. But there's so many digital archives equally being, you know, created at the moment, and it's a very interesting trend. You know, but if you look at Nepal history is basically recorded by the foreigners. When the Nepal was opened in the 50s, they came here and then they were recording anything and everything. You know, and we are still relying in that documentation and talking about our own culture and tradition, right? But I think we are in that time frame that we must actually work with to create our own history. You know, that means we start archiving ourselves, we start documenting what we have, and the process is so important. I think it's not only in art and architecture field only. I think the whole process of archiving, the importance of archiving is required in each and every field.
Right. Since you are carrying a long experience and expertise, there are other sets of artists who have passed away and the new generation are also trying to archive things in the same way. What are your suggestions for them?
I think you have to archiving is a process, right? We're talking about a process here. But when you think about a material, I think there are 2 important aspects we need to understand. One is the ownership of those materials, who owns that material, and second part is how do you make it accessible and what are the legalities. You know, that is very important for us to know. And the whole trend of recording the old generation artists and the new generation artists, their material, their documents, everything, it's a great thing to do. But what may happen in the future is nobody would know who owns those materials. You know, and somehow we have to create some sort of regulations how we manage these archives. You know, if we don't manage it properly, then it may become very difficult for us in the future.
There are other sets of artists whose artworks are being archived by the foreign company. Let's talk about the legal aspect that you feel regarding it.
It's a very tricky situation. I think one of the most important part is we have to look at the Nepali law first. And the Nepali law is probably a little bit vague in that sense, or not even being practiced. So being an artist, being an archivist, being a museum we may not know how it really functions, right? But what I will say and what I will stress in that sense is, like when you think about the whole, the idea of collection, and when you think about it from a museum's perspective or from archives perspective, what is important is we need to know the provenance of every single material that we own within our collection or within that particular collection, right? And why is that important? If you look at the, what is happening around the world is we're talking so much about it, who owns the material, and that is very important. So how would we, before following the law, what we need to do is we need to start making our collection safe. And the only way to do that is you sign a document, you create a deed document, or you create a document that shows the transfer of ownership from you to me or you to an institution or whatever that could be. And that is very important. So that tells you a history of that particular object, right? So in future, nobody will be able to come to me and say, okay, you have got my father's collection and I don't know how it get there, and at that point I should be able to show them, look, this is the paperwork we did with your father or whoever is that person is, and that proves that you are the legal owner of that object or the material, right? That is one aspect. The other most challenging aspect is I may own the physical object, right? But the family members of that particular artwork, are they allowed to use the digital material? Or are they allowed to produce a commercial product and sell it in the market? Where are we in that situation? We don't know. If you ask me that question, I don't have an answer either, right? And I think this is a discourse that we need to have with the artist community, and I think we need to discuss this with people who are involved in making laws or who would be able to lobby for those laws, and that is so important. So if we don't manage this, we will be in a difficult situation. Archiving is very important, no doubt at all, but what are the legalities within that process? What do we need to identify? What are the documents that we need to prepare to make sure that it protects the documents we own, or it protects the artwork or the materials that we have? And that is very important. And I think not many archiving organizations, institutions and individuals are doing that, and that could become very challenging over the period of time. What I've seen in Nepal at the moment is you have got the same material in so many different archives. What does that mean? You don't have any documents that says that the owner of that material has agreed to share it with different organizations. I don't think there are such documents ever created. For example, like Peace Corps volunteers photographs, they have got over 24,000 photographs from the Peace Corps volunteers, and there is one person who collected those materials and he has distributed in Nepal to 6-7 different organizations or maybe more. But that has got a clear agreement, which shows that that particular collection is given to 7-8 different organizations and they can use it in any way they want, and it's even in the open domain. So what I'm trying to tell here is we need to find a way how we can actually create such documents which will protect the institution, which will protect the owner or the maker of those documents or the artworks or the material, right? Also, what will happen if there are any financial gain that is being made from that particular collection? Are the family, immediate family, will they be able to kind of get the benefit from that commercial aspect? We need to identify all those aspects. Otherwise, I think it will be a very, very difficult situation.
Let's get back to the Nepal Architecture Archive. Since how long is it being run? And like you have said, so many people have donated their architectural drawings, photographs and whatnots to the archive itself. Is it accessible to the local people or the people who want to go there and see the artworks there? Or is it a private collection? What is it like? How is it going to function?
Nepal Architecture Archive is run under the Saraf Foundation for Himalayan Tradition and Culture. That is the umbrella organization which looks after the Nepal Architecture Archive, the Taragaon Next, which has the Taragaon Museum, and also the Sagarmatha Next. So it's basically an umbrella organization which looks after the Nepal Architecture Archive. And when you look at the collection of the Nepal Architecture Archive, it mainly holds the materials created by the foreign scholars who came to Nepal after 1950s, right? And we started as an architectural archive, and we have got mainly the materials that connects with our architecture and heritage. And the material came from two modes. One is basically donation, and the second is acquisition. We pay certain amount to acquire those materials, and as I previously mentioned, each of these collection has got a deed document where we have signed the transfer of ownership from the donor to us. So the collection is actually quite substantial. I keep on saying that that is probably the only architectural archive in the country. And that particular collection, if you think about from an architectural perspective, yes, it is very important because it has got lots of architectural documentation. If you think about our collection and talk about the materials we have, if you think about Kathmandu, when it fell down in 2015 earthquake, the original drawing that was created by the German scholar Wolfgang Kohn, that the original drawing is actually with us. And with the reference from that drawing, the new Kathmandu was created, right? So you can see how important the collection itself is. So we have got similar materials from different locations and different people, who gave the material to us. That is the overall kind of a collection we have. It's mainly architectural, but we have a huge collection of photographs as well. At the moment, the archive is not accessible to the public. It is only accessible via request, and whoever are willing to come to the archive, they need to be very particular about what they need to see, what they want to come and see the archive. They can't just say that, oh, I want to come and browse. We will probably not give an access in that sense. But if they say, okay, I want to see the Kathmandu's drawing, they're being very specific. So we'll give them a time frame. They will come to the archive and we'll open the document, and we can show that to you. Until now, we are providing access, I would say limited access, on request only. But one of our commitment to our donors and to the scholars whom we are connected with is we wanted to make our collection accessible online, and that is what we are doing at the moment. So we're working in that process, and maybe by the end of this year we may be able to upload a small collection online, so it will become accessible to everyone. So the idea of creating this archive is, one is basically the physical repository where we keep the materials and manage them, and the second part is we want to scan them, digitize them, and make it accessible to the public. So that's what we have been doing at the moment. Coming back to your question, yes, you can access the archive. It's a limited access, I would say, at the moment, on request only. And yes, we're trying to make it accessible to the public, and that is through online. So that is a process. It's going to take some time.
There are people who are confusing the name with the Taragaon Museum and the Taragaon Next. What exactly are these two organizations?
Taragaon Museum was there until last year, August, right? That's how people knew this space. And the idea of reinventing this space to Taragaon Next is driven by the idea of Sagarmatha Next, which is our sister organization, which is under the Saraf Foundation, and it is located in Khumbu region at the height of 3,775 meters high, right? And that is another space. So what is happening now is the Saraf Foundation is looking after two spaces. One is called Sagarmatha Next, and the other one is Taragaon Next. So yeah, the question is there, what is Taragaon Next? So the next word itself is suggesting the audience about what will be next for art, what will be next for architecture, what will be next for education, you know, what will be next for environment, climate and sustainability, you know. That is a very futuristic approach, you know, and that's how the name has been coined. But also if you simplify the whole approach and think about, let's say if you think about Patan Darbar Square, you know, when you say I want to go to Patan in Darbar Square, that doesn't mean that you want to go to Patan Museum, does it? Right? So that means you may want to go to Patan Darbar Square and meet a friend, you may want to go and enjoy the sun, you may want to go and see the Hiti or some of the monuments, or you may want to meet a friend, or you may want to visit the museum also. So the Taragaon Next is the same concept. It's a space, right? It's a multi-layered space, multifunctional space. It has a museum, it has a cafe, it has amphitheaters, it has event hall, it has a contemporary art gallery, it has a green space, and much more, right? So it has become a multifunctional space. Till last year, we were only, you know, talking about Taragaon Museum. We never talked about the building. We have a beautiful building, right? We never talked about the green space we have around, right? We never talked about the amphitheater. We never talked about the events that was happening. We are only talking about the museum and the events. So now it has given us that opportunity where we can talk about so many other things. And the whole idea is kind of driven by the idea of placemaking, where we allow people to come and experience this space in the way they want it. You know, this has become a community space. You know, we talk about youth, we talk about culture, we talk about community, you know, and we talk about, you know, mindfulness. It's such a green space, you know, but it's so hard to find similar space in Kathmandu, right? So we can talk about so many other things. Museum has become just one component. It's still a very important component of the whole structure, and that is what Taragaon Next is. You know, Taragaon Next doesn't mean that we are removing Taragaon Museum from this site. Taragaon Museum still remains as it is, right? But the name of the space has been given. So now we don't call it a Taragaon Museum, we call it a Taragaon Next. And what that meant is it's a space for everyone and all the people and any age group. So we're not limiting to anything. So it's a space for everybody.
You said you are not limiting to anything.
No, I think we just allow people to come and enjoy the space, right? We don't push them to go and see the museum.
Right.
You know, it's entirely up to them. And what you are seeing here is we have got, you know, the Generation Z coming here, the youth. You know, it has become a space for youth. So let them come and engage, you know, let them come and enjoy the space, you know. And they know that the museum is within the space. So it's free for them to go and enjoy if they want to. And I think now, as we are doing a new curation, and people will be able to enjoy the exhibitions as well.
So what are your other plans?
I think the museum, if you look at the whole structure of the museum, I think the whole idea of the space, the collection, and the whole programming structure will change. So we're working with it at the moment. We will have our own programs. We'll focus on our own programs. We'll have some educational component attached to it. We may run some workshops time and again, and we may host other exhibitions as well. So it's all under plan at the moment. We have got a calendar which is being laid out at the moment, and we'll have some regular activities that will happen within this space.
Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much.